This is the beginning of podcast number 16 on Chapter 12, Assessing Student Learning. We're talking about here about another method of assessment called self-assessment, which can be done in all three domains. Self-assessment, of course, means that you're assessing yourself in your different parts of a student's work. It provides the opportunity to assess components of a skill or the beginning use of a skill, and that way students can look at the critical elements and learn how to do the skill. It's also used to assess achievement and student feelings and attitudes. So self-assessment is possible in all three domains. Most of the time for psychomotor skills, a student would use a video or an iPad to be able to look at themselves and how to self-assess. There is an example, a picture on this slide of a self-assessment for a young student in pre-K. One problem that you might have with self-assessment is you have to look at the honesty of the students. Did they inflate their rankings of themselves while they did the assessment? But for the most part, students are pretty honest about things, and a self-assessment is a good thing to use. Again, it needs to be documented, and you need to keep data on those self-assessments, or it's not going to be more than just a formative assessment for a student. The next type of assessment is called event tasks. They're performance tasks with multiple solutions that can be completed within a class period or a portion of it. In other words, it's not a project that you have students work on over several class periods at a time. It's just one class period that should be used. It could be solely psychomotor, or it could also include some cognitive aspects. It does require some independent and group working skills, and sometimes you have to teach students how to use those group working skills, or they'll become off task rather easily. One example of an event task is where a team in flag football gets together and comes up with a book of plays, passing plays or passing routes that they're going to use for their team. It could also be a group that creates a dance or a dance routine sometimes throughout the class using a certain number of dance steps that they've used. It could be a self-designed game or a creating a game or routines in the class. It could also be some type of role-playing situation where students act out certain scenarios. One type of assessment that has become very popular lately are videotaping assessments or digital pictures. Mostly we use videotaping or digital cameras for these types of assessments. It can provide a final product that can actually be assessed or evaluated by the teachers. Students can also use it for self-analysis of their performances, but it allows students to display knowledge and performance of critical aspects of the skills. So it could be a motor or it could be a cognitive type of assessment. It does give you, as a teacher, a permanent record of performances, and it's a good way for teachers to use videotaping or iPad videotaping for reliable scoring or reliable grading of students in their performances. You can take a rubric and replay their performances over and over so you can make sure that you are doing the assessments correctly and according to the criteria that you've laid out for the assessment. One very popular assessment, especially for young kids, pre-K and to about second grade, is student drawings. It's an effective assessment measure because students love to draw. The options are endless. They can draw themselves doing different skills. They can draw what a sequence looks like in a skill. They can draw what skills look like, and they can draw what they like best. There's an example on this slide of a second grader's drawing assessing the cue of using the shoelaces to kick in soccer. It is a paper and pencil type of assessment though, so it is not a physical assessment. It would be a cognitive and or affective assessment. Expression is easy to do and drawing is easy to do, and kids love to do drawing. So what the skill looks like or the sequence of the movements and the pathways or routes and so on that they move in are easy for them to draw in this particular assessment. The next assessment, known as student displays, are public displays of students' work, and there's a variety of forms such as posters, photography, and bulletin boards like you see on this particular slide. It is not a very common type of assessment these days. Drawings are kept usually for individuals and so on, and they're not usually used as formal assessments. These student displays of work are sometimes going against the privacy policies of schools or school districts, so that's why they're not used as much these days. Student drawings that are not up for public display are usually a better way to assess a student. Student portfolios used to be used quite a lot in physical education. It is a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of collecting of data, but it becomes very meaningful for students and particularly their parents when you keep a collection of the students' work together. Students share the responsibility for collecting the proof of their learning, and they are asked to submit their best work as a decision on their part as to what gets put in the portfolios. Usually it's a record of the knowledge, goals, and performance that reflect the purpose of your physical education program for that particular child. They are systematic collections of data and or assessments that have been taken in physical education. It could include many of the other type of assessment products such as fitnessgram reports or written tests and so on. It does provide a rich resource for reporting to both students and parents. The purposes are to evaluate a unit or evaluate an entire school year, to report to parents the students' progress in physical education, and it's also a nice public relations type of thing to do with parents. And it's a collection sometimes over all elementary grades so that a student can see how they have improved and grown from kindergarten all the way to fifth grade. The disadvantage of student portfolios obviously is if they're in paper form or hard copy form, it's very hard to store 650 students' portfolios in an elementary school. However, because of computers and iPads and so on, it's become much easier through technology to keep the data for these student portfolios together. Rubrics, either holistic or analytic, rubrics are now becoming one of the most popular ways to assess in physical education. The good thing about rubrics is that they provide the guidelines for scoring assessment items ahead of time. In other words, it lets the students know the criteria ahead of the evaluation. It makes the learning expectations clear. There is a sample, very small one on this slide, of a rubric at level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. By the way, we usually don't use 0 for a point value on a rubric because uh, students are always learning something. They're not going to learn 0 about something. So it does provide students feedback. It supports the development of skills and understandings. And the components or the levels include criteria that are essential to be assessed, steps of the quality or rating scale, and the descriptors illustrating each step as related to the criteria. So rubrics are usually formatted in a table with performance levels, somewhere between 3 and 5 levels, and then there are descriptions written underneath each of the performance levels for each of the critical skills or the gameplay aspects or whatever it is that you are assessing in that particular rubric. Again, a holistic rubric is the performance of a whole skill or a whole gameplay rubric or whatever. And an analytic rubric is performances analyzed and they're assigned points for each one of the levels. In this day and age, we do talk about standards-based assessment and standards-based reporting quite a lot. We have national standards, we have state standards, and those state standards are basically what most physical education teachers have to achieve. The standards-based reporting is usually in a form of summative evaluation that provides parents and children with an indication of their progress or the student's progress. Examples of systems or grading school systems that report progress and achievement, not grades, include Linden Elementary School in Tennessee, Fargo, North Dakota report card, and so on. If grades are required, it is recommended to specify what the grades mean and to assess exactly what is specified. In other words, instead of just putting a number or a letter on the grade report, there needs to be some explanation as to what those things mean as far as your student's achievement goes. Grading in particular schools, specific schools, may be different in every place that you teach. You may not have a choice in the format of grading in the school district where you end up getting a job. They might grade A through F in physical education. They might grade 1, 2, and 3. They might grade according to checks or check minuses or whatever. And they also could grade according to SU. So many times you will see physical education is not graded the same way that other subject areas are, and that's just plain wrong. If chemistry gets graded A, B, C, D, F, then physical education should also be graded that way. Same thing for physical education. If we are graded SU, then chemistry and math should be graded SU also. And lastly, finding time for assessment is difficult. Assessment is a critical component of the learning process, though, because you have to know whether your students have learned. Tips for minimizing wait times during assessment is to set up stations or learning centers. You could set up a camera so that students could go to that station. You could ask others to assist with the class. You could videotape the children and view it later, which is a common thing done these days. You could use a tape recorder as you teach and record your comments so that you can transcribe them later, which takes a lot more time. You could use a handheld computer assessment program, or particularly an iPad program, and write down things in an Excel sheet on the iPad so you could keep a track of what the students' performances are. But it's important to find time for assessment. You don't have to be assessing every single minute of your class period, but assessment is a critical component to teaching. This is the end of podcast 16 and the end of chapter 12.